Happy Homebrew Wednesday, everybody. S.J. Poor here from Little Face Brewing, sitting here enjoying my 10-gallon hat. Give you a few facts about today. Today, the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg. This is the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. So, at 5:30 to 10:30 a.m., Confederate Major General Edward Johnson planned to renew the attack at the first light once more reinforcements were available, and he still believed he faced large numbers. Early in the morning of July 3rd, the Union artillery, perched on Baltimore Pike, opened up on the Confederates. This was followed by a Union infantry assault in which they swept downhill off of Culp's Hill and attacked through the woods. The fighting was fierce, and for several hours the two armies battled back and forth. The Union commanders did a superb job of rotating troops so that the constant rate of fire could continue. Johnson attempted multiple charges up the hill, but each time the attacks were repelled. From 1 p.m. to 3:50 p.m., General Robert E. Lee's plan of attack was to assault the Union center with 12,000 troops, where General James Longstreet coordinated the attack. After a devastating artillery attack that was intended to loosen up the Union defenses, the Confederates attacked across a mile of open ground. On the other side of the battlefield stood Union General Winfield S. Hancock and the 2nd Corps. The Corps of Trees in the center of Hancock's lines were the focus of the Confederate assault. The Confederate ranks were close to a mile wide, and through a series of obliques would concentrate their forces in the middle of the Corps of Trees, marking the Union lines. The Confederates were under constant long-range artillery fire, and this created ghastly holes in their ranks. The Confederate ranks were steadily decimated, and the lines were now close to a half-mile long as Pettigrew moved to the right and Pickett toward the left, converging toward the Union lines. On the Union side, General Hancock was wounded in the thigh, and he issued an order that he not be removed from the battlefield until the engagement was decided. Finally, the Confederates reached the stone wall with roughly 200 men, led by General Armistead, who had put his hat on his sword. They stormed the wall and fought hand to hand with Union soldiers. Shortly thereafter, General Armistead was mortally wounded, and as Union reinforcements arrived, Pickett's charge stalled. Without leaders, the remainder of the Confederates either retreated, were killed, or were captured. The Confederates had over 50% casualties, while the Union had only 1,500 casualties total. General Lee rode up to meet his troops as they retreated and exclaimed that the failure was all my fault. So that's how it pretty much ended 150 years ago today at approximately 3:50 p.m. Just actually only, 2-3 hours ago? Something like that, 150 years ago. Gettysburg is a national battlefield, which is hallowed ground to those of us in this area. Very interesting, because a lot of stuff has went on around here prior to the Battle of Gettysburg that most people across the country don't even realize. Take, for example, June 27th and June 28th, prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederates stormed into York, and they actually took York over, and they held it for ransom. I find this very interesting. They held it for ransom. They wanted $100,000 and all of the bread, milk, and eggs. Well, the York citizens were able to get together about $28,000 and gave them what milk and bread and eggs that they had. From that point on, it was such a victory that General Lee ordered those troops to move out of York and on to Philadelphia, where they were met June 28th, 1863 in Columbia. Now, the residents of Columbia knew this, and in order to keep the Confederates from crossing the Susquehanna River and marching on to Philadelphia, which at that time would have been devastating, would have been absolutely devastating, and the war would have turned out differently. I almost guaranteed it would have turned out differently, because up to that point, there was a lot of victories on the Confederate side. Well, the residents of Columbia took it upon themselves because the government wouldn't do it. They went through and they tried to burn, or actually they tried to blow up what is known as Wright's Ferry Bridge. It's the longest covered bridge in the world at that time. Covered bridge across the Susquehanna River, a mile-long covered bridge. They went to the center of it and tried to blow it up. Well, that didn't work. So they continued on to the other side, to the Wrightsville side, and they burn it down. They burn it to the ground. So the Confederates got to the bridge, saw that it was burning, and, well, they couldn't do anything else. They turned around and went back and marched into Gettysburg, because just below Gettysburg there was some battles actually off to the side of Gettysburg in Carlisle. Hence the beginning of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, I'm not a history buff. I'm not really all that much of a Civil War buff. But I find this all extremely fascinating. And I encourage you that if you're ever in the area, please stop by our National Monument in Gettysburg and view and see and take the tours and do all that. It is probably one of the more fascinating things you could possibly do. So, with that said, happy 4th of July to all of you. And happy Homebrew Wednesday. Enjoy the fruits of your labor, folks. Brew beer and celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. Do your history. Look it up. It's pretty awesome.